Good day. Welcome and thanks for joining me today for another web talk in the series, The Many Faces of Islamic Anti-Semitism. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, and today my special guest is Joe Adam George, whom I will introduce shortly. First, I would like to thank all of our co-sponsors whose support helps us reach a wider audience. Our webinars are all recorded and you can view them on the CAEF YouTube channel or our website, which is simply www.caef.ca. Today's co-sponsors include the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the Middle East Forum, the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, Canadians for Israel, the J.ca, the Matthias Project, Beth Tikva Synagogue, the Ludger Center Congregation, Toronto Zionist Council, the Israel Activist Calendar, Tavseek, the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, One Global Voice, the Massachusetts Anti-Semitism Synagogue Task Force, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, End Jew Hatred Canada, and Americans for a Safe Israel. CAEF is a national charitable organization, and while our work is mainly done by volunteers like myself, we do require funds for initiatives such as our research into campus anti-Semitism, academic symposia, rallies and vigils, producing our educational materials, and general promotion of programs and information, such as our recent Shalom Project. I invite you to visit our website to see these resources. One of our latest contributions to fighting anti-Semitism is as a silver sponsor for the upcoming Symposium on Anti-Semitism to be held May 5th to 7th, inclusive at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. Anyone interested, please go to our website for information. Over the past few weeks, it's come to my attention that there are more articles, more people speaking out, more information being shared about the threat of Islamism. Perhaps something has changed. Political correctness, lawfare, threats and intimidation, and a woke leftist view of the world may have kept many critics from speaking out about radical or political Islam. But as its influence has grown, it is most essential that it be exposed. Today's speaker is an expert on this topic. Today's guest is Joe Adam George, the research lead at the Middle East Forum for Islamist Threats in Canada. He's also a foreign policy and national security analyst with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa, where he covers Islamist extremism in the West, as well as terror financing and geopolitical developments in the Middle East and South Asia, and their impacts on Canada and the US. Joe previously worked in the Parliament of Canada as a press secretary and advisor to the Leader of the Opposition, and as a research intern at the Hudson Institute's Center for Political Military Analysis. He has published a great deal, including in the National Post, the Globe and Mail, the Hill Times, the Hill, Real Clear World, the Times of India, and the Economic Times. Joe has a master's degree in communications and marketing from the University of Leeds in the UK. He was raised in Muscat, Oman, and lived there for 16 years. Since then, he has been highly, or what he describes as globally, mobile, having lived in India, the UK, the UAE, and Qatar. Joe is an ardent Zionist and strongly supports and advocates for Israel's right to exist and defend itself. In addition to the threats from the Chinese Communist Party to Canada and the West, Joe considers Islamist extremism to be the biggest existential threat that the West faces within its own borders today. And this threat is against everything that the West stands for. Joe is a Canadian citizen who calls Ottawa home, but today he's joining me from a place in Toronto. Following Joe's presentation, I'll have a few questions to pose, and I'll take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A on your screen, not in the chat, so that I'll know where to look. Okay? Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to talk about something that's as compelling as Islamist extremism. We live in very dangerous times, and the world is, I imagine, as I'm sure you all know, has gotten a lot more dangerous since October 7, 2023, after everything that happened in Israel that day. I vividly remember that morning after everything was playing out in the news, that this is not about Palestine. I knew this was a lot more. This was not just about Jews or Israel. This was a lot more sinister than what it seemed. But it took a while for, a lot of people to come around to realize that, yes, that this isn't just about Jews or Israel or Palestine. It's much more. It's about the destruction of the West and everything that the West stands for. So just want to start off by making the distinction between Islamism and Islam, because that's often mixed up, commonly. So Islam is a 1400-year-old faith that includes a great range of sects and movements. On the other hand, Islamism is a century-old utopian political ideology that seeks to return to past glories by imposing medieval religious laws based on Sharia, and it focuses on all walks of life, ranging from political, economic, cultural, educational, and so on. The adherents of Islamism believe that everything that the West stands for, and not just the West, by the way, even Muslim countries in the Middle East, that includes the likes of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Kuwait, and so on. They are all, because of the nationalist agenda, they are all antithetical to Islam, and they believe in the downfall of these governments. And before I move on, I'm going to show you some videos of how it's always better, I believe, for Islamists, to try and convince the rest of us about their intentions rather than me trying to do that for them. So I'm going to play a few videos where you can hear them, their own words about what their agenda and ulterior motives are.
إن حضارة فرنسا والغرب حضارة كاذبة خاطئة، حضارة إلحاد وكفر، فهم يكرهون دين الله الحق، دين التوحيد. حضارتهم حضارة عهر وفجور وشذوذ، لهذا فهم يحقدون على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. يا مكرون الزم حدك، يا مكرون الزم حدك، بالجهاد نهدم مجدك، بالجهاد نهدم مجدك، يا مكرون يا خسيس، يا مكرون يا خسيس، بكره رح نفتح باريس، بكره رح نفتح باريس. من المسجد الأقصى نقول لمكرون عدو الله ورسوله: أبشر يا عدو الله ورسوله بالذي يسوءك، نحن على موعد مع خلافة راشدة على منهج محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
All of our preaching is about fortifying people's imans, making them stronger and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have so much to do. Yeah. So there's what percentage of Muslims actually pray 5 times a day? What percentage around us is non-Muslim? So we literally have light years before we're talking about some critical mass to get to that. You see what I'm saying?
I agree.
So Bismillah, Ardullahi wasi'a, the whole world.
The message for the people of Gaza is going to be more of the message that should be sent to the people here, in that they have achieved victory. We haven't done anywhere near enough. And the people here, I promise you, we do feel ashamed. We do feel like we're not doing enough. We do feel like change needs to come, because change must come. And in the form that it must come is that this empire, the American empire that's been hurting our people since the beginning, the imperial Western powers that have been hurting our people since the beginning, they must fall. And inshallah they will fall. And my message to the people of Gaza and the oppressed peoples across the world is that there are people here, both young and old, who are going to be willing to fight and are willing to put their lives and everything they can on the line to bring these empires down, because they must come down.
Muslims need to be involved in politics And we need to teach our kids to be the next, that we need to teach our kids that you are going to be the next president of this country. We just need to get Muslims up there somehow, and some way Muslims need to be in control, and this is the way it should be.
Ya Allah, help us against the qawm al-kafirin. Allah says, إِذَا لَقِيتُمْ فِئَةً فَاثْبُتُوا. When you meet the contingent, then be firm. We learn over here, don't give up, don't falter, don't waver. Whatever is your plan, whatever is your vision, whatever is your agenda, continue and persevere. Even if you personally fail, the army is going to succeed. You might not get to the end, but if you collectively push together, you will get to the end. Do not take your personal failure as the failure of the entire army. You might not see the victory, but you must continue to persist and persevere. You do your job and leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a direct commandment. فَاثْبُتُوا. Remain firm. Whatever is your agenda and plot, whatever is your entire khitta or your methodology, persevere in that and don't give up. فَاثْبُتُوا. The next point, وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Even as you're engaged in your methodology, even as you're doing what you need to do, don't forget, help comes from Allah. So make sure your tongue is constantly moving with the dhikr of Allah. Ya Allah.
This is just on the slide to talk about, just to highlight what, for Islamists, when it comes to history, they indulge in a lot of revisionism. So as you can see in this map of Spain, Islamists like to believe that Spain once belonged to them, and hence they believe that Spain will be eventually conquered. They believe that it was illegitimately taken from them by the Crusaders, and they hope that in the future that they'll be able to reclaim what was once theirs. And which is why you will see similarities with the leftists as to why, just like the left indulges in historical revisionism, as you've seen often time and time again across the West, the Islamists, practically, find that also to their appeal, which is why they get along like a house on fire when it comes to engaging with the lefts. So the Muslim Brotherhood, where does all this stem from? Islamism, terrorism, violent extremism, and so on. The mess that you see in the world today, where does it all come from? And that's the group that's behind it is the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt in 1926 by an Egyptian school teacher named Hassan al-Banna. Now, Hassan al-Banna himself, like I said, he his own agenda when he created the Muslim Brotherhood, along with the other group of radical Islamists, was to bring down the West. So they were very focused in the goal of making sure that they, they fight what they referred to as the kafirs, which essentially refers to unbelievers or non-Muslims. It's a derogatory term, which means infidels. So the objective is that you don't just beat us, overcome the West through violence, but also covertly by influencing its political, educational, and cultural systems. And that way you conquer the West from within. So on the left here, as you can see, this is what they aim to do. This is from Ikhwan. It is from their very own English website, the official website of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was once posted. Now it's since been taken down. But you can clearly see what they have outlined as their objectives on achieving their ultimate goal, which is to take over the West. And of course, on the right, what you see is the Muslim Brotherhoods. Very recently, the British government last year pointed out that the Muslim Brotherhood is among the top priority that they concern when it comes to addressing terrorism. In fact, since October 7th, the attacks on October 7th, they found that the Muslim Brotherhood has gone on hyperdrive in radicalizing the youth of Britain. So these are some of the gems from Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. As you can see, Everything is about bringing down the West, is inherent hatred for Jews, Christians, and anybody else that is not Muslim. And you can see the second quote by him. It is the nature of Islam to dominate, not to be dominated, to impose its law on all nations and to extend its power to the entire planet. He also talks about overcoming the Jewish state, which he hopes one day will be, Jews will be driven to the sea and completely destroyed. And he, of course, refers to jihad as well. And this is a clip talking about the Muslim Brotherhood plan, which was uncovered in 1991 to take over North America, which includes the US and Canada.
I am holding in my hand the Muslim Brotherhood plan for the destruction of the United States, written 5/22/1991. The title of the plan is مذكرة تفسيرية للهدف الاستراتيجي العام للجماعة في أمريكا الشمالية. You all got that? There will be a quiz. It is titled the Muslim Brotherhood, an explanatory memorandum for the general strategic goal for the group, the Muslim Brotherhood in North America, written 5/22/1991. This plan was presented as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism trial ever in the history of the United States, where our government handed down, hello, my best friend, where our government handed down 108 guilty verdicts for Muslim Americans and Muslim American organizations raising money to support terrorist organizations in the Middle East to the tune of millions. And I'm just going to read you a paragraph of this plan, so it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. They talk about the settlement in the United States. Understanding the role of the Muslim Brother in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which is the Arabic word for brothers, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Is this clear? They don't mince words, do they? But the most important page of this document is the last page. Because in the last page, they list 29 front Islamic organizations set up in the United States with the specific goal of sabotaging America from within and destroying America by our own hands.
This video is of one such organization which talks about their 100-year plan to take over the US and make it a Muslim nation. And their objective, one of the ways that they plan on doing that is by running as many Muslims in politics so that they get elected to public office in order to achieve that.
We're reaching out with service ahead of power, and that all of us deserve power in this nation, which we govern together. I think maybe not in the next 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, but in the next 100 years.
You can see, where you might expect it in California, in New Jersey, which has the most elected Muslim officials, in Minnesota, elsewhere. And there are other states where, we can see like Florida. There's just one elected Muslim official we could identify. And I know for a fact that there are thousands, tens of thousands of Muslims in Florida, and we can do a better job. So I look at this nationwide picture, and for me, it really it paints a picture of, you climb a mountain and you say, yes, I have success.
So you might have heard the term jihad mentioned quite a few times in this past videos. Now, often jihad, there's a lot of misconception around what jihad really means. It often, in the West, people mistakenly just refer to it as the holy war, which is not necessarily accurate, and also jihad people assume is just the kinetic aspect of it, which is when you talk about bombs going off, or or terrorists trying to stab or use vehicles to run over people and murder them. But that's not, that's not just the only way that jihad is done. The non-kinetic aspect of jihad is what Islamists primarily focus on, which is, you can be a lawyer, for example, trying to help a group like Hamas be delisted as a terrorist organization, or you could be a teacher teaching young students about Islam and saying that Allah is the only way to life and eternity. So it essentially refers to a human struggle to promote what Islamists think is the right way to achieve eternity, and what they think is wrong. So the four ways, like as mentioned here, were jihad, which is these come the meaning of jihad is primarily found in the extra text referred to, which is used by Quran. So one is by the heart, by and by the tongue, which you saw most of the people do, like propagate Islam. The hand, which is again, you can be a lawyer, a teacher to do that, and then the sword, which is what terrorists usually use. So these are some of the ways in which you've seen Islamists across the world operate. Now, these are just the non-kinetic aspect that I was referring to, the way in which they covertly try and influence society, political systems, and to eventually obtain that takeover of the West. I've not even mentioned the terrorist aspect of it, because that's an entirely different, that would require an entirely different seminar or a webinar to do that. But if you can see in Australia how just because in a certain community there were 61% of Muslims in Sydney, they have now been they have forced the politicians there to allow them to broadcast the call to prayer through loudspeaker. This is for the first time in the history of Australia that it is happening and it's happening in Sydney. This just happened last week. Similarly, my personal favorite is the one about the pride flag. I don't know if many of you know this, but in 2015, in Michigan, in the city of Hamtramck, which is now a predominantly Muslim city. In fact, the first Muslim city in the U.S. The leftists, including many of them who were members of the LGBTQ community, helped the city council to become, elected all Muslim city council. And what happened as a result of it? A few years later, this is just 2 years ago, barely 2 years ago, the all Muslim city council decided to ban LGBTQ flags, and what's worse, the city has become absolutely unsafe for LGBTQ people, as you can see the headline that I mentioned above. So this is, talk about setting yourself on fire just so you don't want to get shot. So that's essentially what the LGBTQ community ended up doing to itself by voting for an all-Muslim city council in the US. So similarly, these are all headlines from across the world of how Islamists operate covertly to take over, to undermine our political systems and take over Western civilization. So moving on to Canada. So when did this start? The whole Islamism trend. It's not a new phenomenon, actually. In 2011, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute study on Muslim public opinion in Canada found that only a small minority of Canadian Muslims rejected terrorist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, or even the IRGC. And and also within that same group that was studied, only 35% of them failed to fully reject Al-Qaeda, which in itself are worrying. And mind you, this was in 2011 that this poll was taken. This was before ISIS came in the picture. So now this figure could be much higher because of a lot of exacerbating factors, including youth radicalization, uncontrolled immigration, the Middle East conflict, and also the availability of propaganda that's available online. So that was one. But also, this is not just, I mean, this precedes 2011. Back in 1998, War Elcock, who was then the CSIS chief, testified before a Senate committee hearing saying that it was his opinion that there were at least over 100 terrorist groups operating in Canada back then in the 90s. And the activities of these groups included everything from logistical support, fundraising, exploiting communities, and intimidating them and the immigrants themselves. So you can see that this trend, this phenomenon of Islamism is not new in Canada. It was not something that we see or we are seeing play out since October 7th. This has been in the works for decades. This is one such group that was earlier this year called the Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is now being considered by the Liberal government just before, of course, we are now in our, as you know, we got our elections later this month, but back in January this year, they were planning to do a Khilafah conference. Khilafah is Arabic for caliphate. Hizb ut-Tahrir, just to give you some context, is a listed terrorist organization in the UK. And also by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. However, it is they have done conferences in the past in Canada, and they have a massive following across the globe. Hizb ut-Tahrir was created from the Muslim Brotherhood. The founder of Hizb ut-Tahrir himself was a Muslim Brotherhood operative, and he created Hizb ut-Tahrir simply because he felt that the Muslim Brotherhood was not radical enough for him and for a bunch of others. So Hizb ut-Tahrir is as radical as you can get. And of course, a lot of the proponents of Hizb ut-Tahrir have gone on to commit terrorist attacks, needless to say. This is one of the promotional videos that I downloaded when they for the conference earlier this year.
Over the past 100 years, in the absence of the Khilafah, the Ummah has been tested with death, destruction, dishonor, and destitution. We have suffered from ruthless colonial wars, the tyranny of secular regimes backed by the colonial powers in the Muslim lands, brutal occupations, and genocides. Going from a state ruled by Islam, under which the Muslims brought light and guidance to humanity, to what we witness today makes many ask, when will the victory of Allah come? In fact, it is forbidden to despair in the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Messenger of Allah sallam, foretold the re-establishment of the Khilafah and the dominance of this deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us the victory, and we have a Sharia from him that clearly guides us on how to restore the Khilafah. Finally, Rasulullah sallam, told us that when the believers stand for the haqq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test them with trials and tribulations. Rasulullah sallam, and the Sahaba themselves had suffered from Quraysh's oppression, yet they did not despair. They knew that while their road was difficult, they were only getting closer to the victory of Allah. Despite all the oppression and suffering we see today, our Ummah is only getting closer to the victory of Allah. With each passing day, the colonialist powers are losing time, while our Ummah is becoming more aware, more united, and more steadfast. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us the victory when we are ready to lead humanity. So let's prepare ourselves, inshallah.
All right. So as you saw in that video by Hizb ut-Tahrir, their objective is to create a global caliphate, which of course is they essentially want to repeat what was created 100 years ago, the Ottoman, what they refer to as the Ottoman Empire. So they still have, you know, thoughts about the Ottoman Empire and how what it meant to them. The Islamist, I mean, the creation of a Sharia law-driven society. And the objective is, again, that the West be taken over and becomes part of this global caliphate. So how is all of this possible in Canada? Why is it that, you know, Islamists like the Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Muslim Brotherhood, and a bunch of other organizations that operate under the Muslim Brotherhood umbrella in Canada find it so easy to operate here? First is the political correctness, the environment around it. As we know, it's an highly sensitive environment. We can say little, do little without offending each other's sensibilities. The spirit of woke culture being so strong as it is in Canada, you know, the indulgence of the left to in historical revisionism that, like I mentioned before, identity politics, victimhood, and Islamists thrive in that which is why you often see Islamists trying to co-opt, you know, the indigenous story as well. Sorry, indigenous people's story as well. They often, you know, want to portray themselves as victims of colonial powers like the U.S. And Europe, and including even Saudi Arabia and the UAE as well. So, and hence they continue that, which is why they talk about even Palestine being one such victim of Israel, because Israel, according to Islamists, is a colonial project of the West. Then, of course, we got the vote bank politics, which, as you know, pretty much all the parties here in Canada are infiltrated by Islamist groups, especially the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens. We have been, as you know, you have been tracking the landscape now, the political landscape. You've seen this photo that you have here is a Liberal MP just last week canvassing at a mosque in Ottawa, promising that, you know, talking about the genocide that's happening in the Middle East. You know, of course, he's referring to the fact that Israel is committing genocide. The other bit is our, you know, Canadians' general apathy towards national security as an issue, unlike Americans, because for decades, as you all know, we have had the Americans take care of our national security needs. So we have generally been very laid back as a society and as a country when it comes to national security, and hence, which is why very few people in Canada take the problem of the issue of Islamist extremism very seriously, including the government. And then, of course, you got your unchecked immigration policies, especially under the Liberal government in the last 10 years, which has resulted in limited integration. Many of the immigrants from the Middle East and South Asia bringing in their past cultural baggage and issues as well. And also because the government has failed to put in any proper background checks. And hence you're seeing in a lot of terrorists, a lot of questionable characters come in through our system without, you know, proper checks. And then finally, there's a general lack of national identity or patriotism. Of course, I mean, when you have the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, say that Canada is a post-national state, there's nothing really you can do. And the Islamists, as you can see from as you saw from the previous videos, they hate patriotism or nationalism, since that is contrary to what Islam is about. So for them, they thrive in the absence of nationalism or patriotism. So who are these friends of Islamists that do so here in Canada, that make them so successful and, you know, take their agenda forward? First and foremost, of course, we talked about the communists and the the leftists who do their bidding. We often, of course, refer to them as the useful idiots. The Khalistanis are the radical Sikh group which seeks to carve out a state for itself primarily from India. So because Khalistanis and Islamists see India as a threat, Islamists because of the issue of Kashmir, and Khalistanis because they want to create the state of Khalistan. So Khalistanis quota with Islamists to do their bidding as well. And then on the criminal front, you got the Mexican drug cartels, the transnational organized crime gangs like your Hells Angels and Wolfgang, and the Chinese mafia as well, mostly operating out of Vancouver. They work with the likes of Hezbollah to push in drugs and so on. I remember a former RCMP officer telling me that every time a Mexican drug cartel boss flew into Vancouver, it was to sit down with guys from Iran and China and the Chinese, somebody from the Chinese Communist Party, because they were the guys with the money. So all these guys indulge in criminal activity. If you remember, some of you might remember the TD Bank case from last year, which the Biden administration's Department of Justice had fined the biggest ever, had levied the biggest ever fine on a foreign bank, a TD Bank, because the TD Bank had indulged in money laundering, and some of the money involved terrorist funds belonging to Hezbollah. So these are the people who help Islamists thrive in Canada. So does the government do anything to stop it? Not particularly. Islamist groups, thanks to the Liberal government, have generally thrived. This sums of money that you're seeing is data that from a Middle East Forum report that they published last year, where between 2018 and 2022, these 5 groups, Islamist groups, received $43 million from the Liberal government, the Trudeau government. Of course, the biggest recipient of them was the Muslim Association of Canada, which is the largest grassroots Muslim Islamist group and a well-known, operative of the Muslim Brotherhood as well. If you go and pay a visit to the website, you will see that they glorify Hudson al-Banna and they celebrate the Muslim Brotherhood. So that group gets $31 million. And then you got the Islamic Relief Canada, ISNA. ISNA's was extremely worrying. Back in 2019, ISNA was pulled up by the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, for funneling money to a terrorist group in South Asia, which was involved in fighting against India. But despite that, all that CRA did was give them a small fine and a 1-year suspension of the charity status. They are back in action, and they have continued to get money from the government despite the past issues. So you can see how serious the Liberal government takes terrorism or Islamist extremism. And then you got ICNA, and then you got National Council of Canadian Muslims. This is, I'm sure you would have seen last month, this is a Toronto police podcast, and you got 2 Muslim cops celebrating the fact that there are people converting to Islam by the dozen on account of, following the October 7 terrorist attacks.
It's funny you say this because, through social media, a lot of people after October 7th started learning about Islam.
They did, yeah.
And they said, okay, what is it with the religion that why is it so hated? Yeah. You know what I mean? Why are they being attacked all the time? So people say, you know what, let me learn about Islam. And there have been a lot of reverts through this whole process. I couldn't imagine, I guess when you're on social media, most of the feeds come through you. Once you see one, it just keeps coming. But the amount of people that are reverting to Islam is unbelievable, and they're just I guess through education, right? They're actually educating themselves and saying, what is it that Muslims are being targeted, and why are they being targeted? Let me learn about this religion. What are these accusations that they're saying about Islam, and let me learn about it myself and figure out, hey, is it actually true or not?
So you can see that even Islamists have infiltrated our police forces and our security agencies as well. Now, you might have heard, if you listen to it closely, you might have heard one of the police officers mention the term revert rather than say convert. It's a ploy by Islamists to suggest that that human beings are reverting back to Islam, which is a natural way of life, and rather than say convert. So they believe that Islam was, I mean, everything predates on Islam. The world, I mean, the creation and everything is based on Islamic values and Allah. So hence Islamists like to use the term revert rather than convert. And of course, like I was mentioning before, the Islamophobia grift is well funded and supported by the Liberal government. This is a Canadian guide. This is a guide that the Liberal government released from the Amira. I mean, it was actually Amira Al-Gawabi, as you may know her. She's Canada's Islamophobia czar. Essentially saying that you can't criticize anything to do. I mean, if you talk about Islamist extremism, you're an Islamophobe. You can't, any legitimate criticism is deemed as bigotry. So this is all thanks to Liberal government funding. On the right, you can see Amira celebrating the fact that in the last 20 odd years, the Muslim population in Canada has more than doubled. So, and that for her is a matter of celebration. One of the factors that Islamists love to address is immigration. You can see here in this next slide that the National Council of Canadian Muslims, this is one of the issues that they focus on their website, borders and immigration. And why they do that is because their desire is to bring in more people from the Muslim world so that they can eventually influence public policy in Canada. This is an immigration lawyer. You might have seen the news in the last few days in Britain talking about wanting to fight on behalf of Hamas to delist them as a terrorist group in the UK. Now, he's doing this work on a pro bono basis. Now, you might think this is happening in the UK and it definitely will not happen in Canada. And if you are thinking that, you're sorely mistaken, because here I found that PhD students are actually putting out papers talking about, getting Muslim terrorist organizations or Islamist terrorist organizations delisted, because they feel, as you can see on your left here, the abstract reads that policymakers rely on white logic to depict state institutions as neutral, obscuring the inherent anti-Muslim orientation. Concerns about systemic Islamophobia are addressed through incremental reforms, keeping intact the racial knowledge underpinning these institutions. So essentially, the person on the right here, Sana, whose paper I'm referring to, is suggesting that because it's because of white, and that it's a white people thing, that white people fail to realize or recognize what Islamism, what these terrorist groups are really about, and these groups are essentially resistance groups. So there is definitely a lot of bigotry involved, is what she's suggesting in her paper. But this is not the only paper that is doing the rounds. I came across at least one other paper and a session done here on the right-hand side by yet another PhD student, Basima Alami, at the University of Toronto, pushing a paper about how the impact of terrorist designations impacts Palestinian advocacy. So you can see that this is slowly being normalized. in our Canadian universities, extremism. We are creating a generation of students who think that terrorism is actually a legitimate form of resistance. This is a new college that's coming up right here in Mississauga. It's by the Muslim Association of Canada, and they're going to start operations in September this year. As you can see, their objective is to teach liberal arts from an Islamic perspective. I'm pretty sure you know what that's supposed to mean. So I'll leave it to you to do your research on this institution. Fine. So this is what we get from years of coddling Islamism in Canada. There's dirty money by the dozen for being funneled from Canada into the Middle East, which is problematic not just for Israel, but also for neighboring liberal or moderate Muslim countries like the UAE and Saudi and Bahrain. You got ISIS making a comeback in Canada. There's youth radicalization on the up. The terrorist threat is also significant, as reported by Stuart Bell earlier this year. And you're seeing just this past weekend, the photo from the bottom, in the bottom you see, is from Ottawa, right in front of a parliament, where they're doing public prayers now. You got one coming up again tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. at Nathan Phillips Square, where they're publicizing public prayers. So, you got Jewish synagogues, Jewish schools being targeted. All this has become a norm. So in Canada, all on account of the rise of Islamism. And that's all. Just want to leave you with a cautionary tale of what the UK is facing today. And what once started as a slippery slope is now gone into a full descent of chaos. And it doesn't seem like UK is going to ever recover from its dose of Islamist extremism. You would have seen from the examples I shared across the world that there are lessons for us to learn, and it's already happening here in Canada, and that there is much for us to do, and it is imperative for each one of us to reach out to our officials, our government leaders, and discuss this problem with them. But I also encourage you to do your own research on this topic so that you can educate not just yourself, but also your community leaders on this growing threat of Islamist extremism. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So we have a number of questions, and I'll just let people know that because the time is tight, I am prepared to go a little bit over our normal 1 hour because I think there's a significant interest here. So a couple of maybe short, quick questions to start with, Joe. First of all, your material is fantastic, and it was really well presented, so we got to the nub of it, what's happening in Canada. Am I correct in perceiving that the Islamist extremism, that is actually increasing in the last few years? Is that the sum of what you're saying? We should be more concerned now than ever?
Absolutely is. Definitely the October 7 attacks opened the doors for Islamists to push through their agenda even more overtly. You could argue that the last 10 years of immigration policy under the Trudeau government did exacerbate this problem significantly. But I would say that the last 2 years, it has definitely peaked since the attacks, because it has given the Islamists the key to go about pushing their agenda under the guise of supporting Palestine, that they're doing it in the interest of Palestinians, but which is not necessarily, the Islamists don't care about Palestine. This was never an issue of land. It's a religious issue. It is about conquest. It goes beyond Jews and Israel. So
I think it makes it clear that there is no two-state solution if what you're saying is the only goal of Hamas and Hezbollah and I guess even the Palestinian authorities to simply eradicate Israel.
Absolutely, yes. It's it, this is about for them. The West is the greatest enemy, and so it is for Iran as well. It's purely based on religion, and it's not just the West, but also like I mentioned, and you saw from the video as well. Even moderate Muslim nations are a threat to them. The caliphate cannot happen, is not possible with moderate Muslims. There is no place. Moderate Muslims are just as bad as non-Muslims in their books. So they target anybody that does not follow the strict Sharia law.
Someone pointed out this is the Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni, and most of the groups, the terrorist groups we can name, are Sunni. But Iran is Shia. Is there any difference in their perspective between the Shia and the Sunni?
So the Muslim Brotherhood is the mothership of all the terrorist groups, the Sunni terrorist groups that you see today, including Hamas. Hamas is actually essentially the Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Islamic Jihad, Al-Shabaab, all these Sunni extremist groups derive much of the ideology from the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, the Shia Sunni thing, when it comes to Israel, they don't really care because at the end of the day, they are united in their goal of overcoming Israel and the West. Iran, of course, being a Shia state and Hezbollah, they follow their objective to destroy Israel is so that they can hasten the coming of their Mahdi, who they believe is a direct descendant of Prophet Muhammad, according to the Shiites. So that is their motive to destroy Israel. For the Sunnis, it's an entirely different thing altogether as well, but very similar.
Very similar. Many people have asked why we are not looking at the funding of universities. We know that in the US, because the government requires reporting of foreign funding, that billions have come from largely Qatar, funding a lot of the Islamist activity, the faculty, the departments. But in Canada, I understand it's not required to report. Do you have any sense of how much or if money, in fact, has come into the universities here and is contributing to all the, I guess, really anti-Israel activity?
That's a great question. I've done my digging, fair bit of digging into this. Sadly, as you very well know, Andrea, our transparency laws aren't the greatest when it comes to reporting on matters. So I found little to nothing on funding from foreign entities, including Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood or Turkey, when it comes to groups, our universities here. But I'm aware of a fact that they do pump money, Islamist groups do pump money into colleges and universities to create Islamic centers. Huron University is as an Islamic center where it teaches or offers Islamic studies. So that's one. And you have, of course, besides that, you do have Muslim student chapters. You got the Muslim Student Association, which is there in UFT, UBCs, and so on. And the Muslim Student Association is, in fact, again, directly associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. I didn't play the video of the link between the MSA and the Muslim Brotherhood because of lack of time, but many of the MSA students have gone on, some of them have gone on to become terrorists themselves. So, and the funding of these student associations are, there is no way of finding out where their source of funds come from.
I've heard the description of the Muslim Brotherhood really as, first of all, a secret society, and secondly, terrorists in suits. It doesn't seem there's any Western country that has actually banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Is that correct?
The only Western country is Austria, which did it just a few years ago in 2021. But yes, you could argue Russia as well, but I've only accounted for Austria since I don't consider Russia as part of the West. But generally, there is a lot of pushback. People governments haven't taken seriously the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood because, again, due to lack of understanding of how the non-kinetic, like I was mentioning, the non-kinetic aspect of Islamism. While we talk about, I mean, all governments understand the threat that ISIS and Al-Qaeda poses when it comes to killing people, but the concept of covertly trying to and subvertly trying to influence governments and take over governments, that simply does not register with most people in power, and which is why you do not find any great interest in addressing the issue of Muslim Brotherhood. I know that Trump in his first term did consider toy with the idea of listing it as a terrorist group, but then it didn't really go anywhere. I'm not sure whether you will do it.
It's the mothership of all of it, but somehow evades detection in some way. Right? Yeah. Can you comment on what we're experiencing in the education system now with something called anti-Palestinian racism, which I'm assuming is also a concept that's pushed out by the Brotherhood?
Yes. Again, APR is a very subtle way for Islamists to, including, and Amira Al-Gawabi has been trying to push that not just through the education system, but also in workplaces, in the police forces as well. She talks about anti-Muslim bias as well. So APR is one way to try and coach, young innocent minds about the fact that Israel is a genocidal state, basically indulge in historical revisionism, which, like I said before, as I pointed out, is a favorite of the Islamists, just like the left. So it goes in perfectly, and given that most of our school boards are very left-leaning and captured by the left, the Islamists, it's pretty easy for the Islamists to go about with their agenda in pushing this.
So how should a democratic country maintain free speech rights and protect themselves from the spread of Islamism?
Unfortunately, the Islamists have even found a way to use our own, the Western values, Western laws against us. Whether it's a charter, in the case of Canada, they definitely know what they're doing. So yes, the only way we can smarten up is by understanding the threat for what it is and making the distinction from moderate Muslims and Islamists. And I think it's very important for governments of the day to rely on moderate Muslims who are very active in this space, like Rahil, Raza, Mohammed Rizwan, and many other folks who are well aware of this in their community, and take their counsel on addressing we can't fight the battle against Islamism without the help of moderate Muslims. Yeah, this is not something that Jews and Christians and anybody, atheists or anybody, can just get together and work on, sadly. We need Muslims on our side in addressing the problem with the community.
But you did point out that as many as high a percentage as 35% among Muslims might be rather indifferent to what went on, say, for October 7th. What percentage of Muslims would be literally anti-Islamism, anti-Islamists?
It's a small minority, no doubt, but you must understand that they are silenced because they would just be booted out of society and by family. I know of at least, I've heard of stories of from at least a couple of Muslim friends who, one of them is gay, who has been shunned by his own family because of the fact that he is gay, and his family is they are devout Muslims. So there are a lot of people who do not want, who fear being, of being expelled by speaking out about this problem. So I think that the point is we need to figure out ways in which we back them, and that requires government support as well, and the security agencies in addressing this in training, because I don't see any other way around it without involving these people.
Well, this may be a tough question, but if it's the governments that have to take steps, and in Canada, we are in the midst of an election. I can't say about to, in the midst of an election. I haven't heard any party address security. They've talked about defense mildly. It's kind of off on the side a little bit, that we should actually have a functioning military, but nobody's talked about security and internal threats. Have you heard anything? Do you think there's any party taking a position that's even aware of this threat?
No, I haven't seen anybody specifically call out Islamist extremism, though in the context of maybe terrorism, there might have things being passed in mentioned in passing, at least by the Conservative Party. I don't see anything by any of the other parties for sure. And listening into last night's debate, the French debate, I gathered that that wasn't really a priority. And plus, you must, as I pointed out in my presentation, you're talking about a group that is 5% of the Canadian population. That is significant. That you're talking about critical mass here, where they're influential. So, and because they're influential, and a lot of these Islamist groups some of them which receive public funding that I pointed out, they claim to hold the keys to the Muslim community. So all parties don't mind playing ball in order to keep these folks happy. So, and that's where we unfortunately find ourselves. So unless we, a country and our parties, make the conscious decision to, detangle themselves from the issue of, from vote bank politics and appeasement politics, we're not going to get anywhere with this problem. And it's not just only with the Muslim community; it's across all communities, ethnic communities, that we are finding this problem with all parties.
Well, I'm going to do one wrap-up question on this. Maybe you've touched on a little bit, because you mentioned several times making government elected people aware and security people aware. So one of the questions in the chat, in the Q&A here, is how to get more information. I will let people know that your presentation will be available. We will post it and share it. But what other sources of data are there if people want to do more? Where would they find information, and what can they do individually to address this?
Yeah, I would say that if this issue is rather new to you, I would suggest going for something very light. Douglas Murray is a good place to start. His books, including the one that has just come out, if I'm not mistaken, it's Democracies and Death Plans. This is a new book. I strongly recommend that. It's a good place to start for you to ease into this issue of Islamist extremism, since Douglas Murray is very well versed on this topic. But yes, besides that, I can put together some of the reading sources from subject matter experts like Robert Spencer, John Gondolo, who's a former FBI agent who was actively, he was targeted by Islamists himself and ended up losing his job as a result of it. So but I also would encourage people to pay attention on social media, look at what's happening. The Epic City case in Texas, which should really concern people. I mean, you're talking about creating a Sharia compliant society around, over 400 acres of land. Right. I just read 2 days ago that the Texas Attorney General is looking into that issue. So this should concern people. You're talking about creating a country within a country, and people following a different set of laws. So that should concern people, even in Canada.
And I hope that your presentation today has alerted all the people that have listened to the fact that we all need to be more active. You can find some of this information on the CAEF website and by receiving the bulletins that we issue almost weekly. And go back and look at two earlier videos, webinars that we did, the recordings of which have been posted that deal with this topic to add to your knowledge and information. And if you do want to be active and you have thoughts about it, please be directly in touch. And Joe, thank you very much. If you do want to put a little resource list together, a reference list, we'll be happy to share that. And I note that a number of the participants here are in different countries, so that's wonderful. And I thank you for joining us. Have a look at what's happening locally where you are. This is a story about what's happening in the West. It's not just Canada or the US or the UK. It is happening, I think, all across Europe, and I suspect in countries in Asia as well. Possibly Africa, that I don't know. Thank you again, George. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today, and I wish you all a lovely afternoon or evening, and check in with us again soon. Bye for now. Thanks again to all of our sponsors, and please go to www.caef.ca to see our programs, participate, and of course, make a donation. Thank you today.